Christmas dinner was the moment my dad decided to tell me I was the biggest embarrassment to the family. He said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. Loud enough for the laughter to stop in the middle of the room. Loud enough that even the chandelier above us felt like it went still. 1 second I was staring at the candles flickering across the polished wood of the dining table. And the next I was listening to my own heartbeat thudding in my ears, slow and cold. The way it sounds right before something breaks inside you. It happened in his usual voice, too. That calm, controlled tone he used whenever he wanted to humiliate someone without raising them volume. He stood at the head of the table with a champagne flute in his hand, pretending like he was giving a holiday toast. Talk about family and values and reputation. Then he paused, turned his head, and locked his eyes on me. For a moment, I thought he was going to compliment my dress or say something polite to smooth over the tension that had been hanging between us all year. Instead, he said that I was the biggest embarrassment to this family. Just like that, like he was reading the weather. Fork stopped in midair. The cousins, who had been whispering about gifts, froze with half smiles still on their faces. Someone let out a soft breath that sounded almost like a gasp. I saw the phones come up first. 2 of them at least, maybe 3. People pretending they were checking messages when everyone in that room knew exactly what they were doing. My mom stared straight ahead as if she could disappear into the centerpiece. My brother lowered his eyes to his plate. Before I go any further, let me pause where everything inside me felt like it was cracking open. I always wonder what people are doing when they listen to stories like this. It makes the world feel strangely close for a moment. If you feel like sharing later, tell me what you are doing right now while you listen. When all of this happened, I was sitting at that table, feeling the warmth from the fireplace behind me, but the air around my shoulders had turned cold as ice. My fingers rested on the stem of the champagne glass. I remember how steady they looked, almost detached from the rest of my body. It surprised me because I thought I should be shaking or crying or angry, but I felt none of that. No heat, no shame, no panic. Just a deep, hollow stillness, like someone had shut down every light switch inside me at the same time. The kind of stillness that comes only after you realize you have been losing pieces of yourself for years, and this is simply the moment someone says it out loud. I lifted the glass and took a small sip. The champagne tasted more bitter than crisp. Maybe it was just the moment. Or maybe it was the way my dad's eyes stayed on me, waiting for a reaction, wanting an explosion. When I set the glass back down, I heard the soft click of it touching the table. That tiny sound felt louder than the voices around me. So consider, I am dead. That was all I said. No raised voice, no dramatic tone, just a sentence that felt like it had been sitting inside my chest for years, waiting for the right time to walk out. My dad blinked. Maybe surprised that I did not cry or apologize or shrink the way he expected. The room held its breath. When I pushed my chair back, the legs scraped the hardwood floor, slow and deliberate. I stood, reached for my coat that hung on the back of the chair and slipped it on with movements that felt almost ceremonial. I did not look at anyone, not even my mom, because I knew if I let my eyes wander, some part of me might hesitate. And I could not afford hesitation. Hesitation was how I had been raised. Do not upset your dad. Do not question him. Do not challenge what he believes. Tonight was the first time in my life I chose to do the opposite. As I walked past the table, I heard a few hushed voices. Someone whispered, "What did she just say?" And another voice answered, "I think she said, she is dead to them." Someone else muttered that the camera was still rolling. Maybe it was all of them. Maybe it was only one. It did not matter. None of it mattered anymore. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon and expensive candles. It was the scent of every Christmas we ever had. But it felt foreign now, like it belonged to another family. My boots clicked against the marble entryway as I moved toward the door. Behind me, I heard my dad say something under his breath, but I kept walking because I knew anything he said next would only make it worse. I pushed open the front door and the winter air hit my face, sharp and clean. The cold wrapped around my shoulders, and for the first time that night, I felt something real. My breath came out in a pale cloud as I stepped outside. The lights from the windows behind me cast long shapes across the snow, bending and shifting as people inside moved closer to watch me go. I did not turn around. I would not give them the satisfaction. I walked to my car, my footsteps crunching softly on the snow that had started falling earlier that day evening. Each step felt strangely freeing, like I was walking out of a story that had been written for me long before I ever had a chance to choose my own lines. When I reached the car door, I stopped for a moment and looked at my reflection in the window. My face looked calm, almost serene, not broken, not angry, not afraid. Just a woman who finally understood that the person who was supposed to love her unconditionally had been pulling her apart piece by piece, year after year, until there was almost nothing left, and that woman had finally stood up from the table. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and let the silence settle around me. The warmth of the car wrapped around my legs as the engine hummed to life. My hand stayed steady on the steering wheel. For a moment, I watched the house through the windshield. I could see silhouettes moving behind the curtains. Heads turning, hands gesturing. Maybe they were talking about me. Maybe they were replaying what happened. Or maybe they had already moved on. That was the thing about my family. They cared deeply about appearance, but never enough to look inward. As I backed out of the driveway, one of the upstairs lights flicked on. It might have been my mom. She always tried to soften the impact of my dad's cruelty, even when her silence ended up hurting me more. But tonight, I could not think about her or anyone in that house. I needed space. I needed air. I needed my own life back. I turned onto the long road that led away from the estate. The street lights glowed faintly against the falling snow, and the sound of my tires on the pavement felt rhythmic and grounding. My phone buzzed several times on the passenger seat. I did not check it. I knew exactly who it was. A part of me wondered how long it would take before someone tried to spin the story or tidy it up or pretend it had not happened. That was always the cycle. But something had changed tonight. I had changed. A few miles from the house, the tension in my chest loosened. My breath came easier, deeper. The world outside blurred softly as the snow thickened. I cracked the window open and let the cold slip into the car, letting it sting my cheeks, clearing the fog inside me. I thought about all the years I tried to win my dad's approval, all the rules I followed, the choices I made to keep the peace, and how in one moment with one sentence, he made it clear there was never any peace to keep. It struck me then that what happened at the table was not the beginning of the story. It was the conclusion of a lifetime of trying to belong to a family that only loved me when I fit the version of myself they wanted. And I knew that if I stayed, if I swallowed the humiliation, if I pretended everything was fine, I would lose myself completely. By the time I reached the highway entrance, the ache in my chest had shifted into something steadier. A sense of resolve, a quiet promise I made to myself as the wind pressed against the side of the car. That night was not just the night I walked away from a room full of people. It was the night I buried the part of me that kept hoping they would change. And as the snow kept falling and the city lights blurred into long, soft streaks ahead of me, I knew one thing for certain. That moment at the dinner table did not only end Christmas. It ended my place in that family. I was driving towards something else now. Something I had not felt in a long time. Space, freedom, and the beginning of everything that came next. The highway opened in front of me, wide and almost empty. The kind of quiet stretch you only get on Christmas night when most people are home, eating leftovers, or drifting off to sleep in houses filled with soft lights and familiar voices. My world felt nothing like that. The farther I drove from my dad's estate, the more unreal the night became, as if I had slipped out of my own life and into someone else's story. The road kept humming beneath the tires, steady and indifferent. And that indifferent sound did something to me. It let me breathe again. I did not cry. I thought I would. I expected some tidal wave of emotion or a flood of anger to hit me the moment I pulled away from that house. But there was nothing. Just that strange hollow quiet spreading through my chest like fog. My eyes stayed dry. My breath was slow. I felt present in my body for the first time in months, maybe years. I think life. It does not shock you. It just confirms what you already knew deep down but could not yet admit. The phone on the passenger seat lit up again. Another vibration rolled across the leather. Then another and another. I did not have to pick it up to know the order. Mom first. Her calls always came in waves when she was afraid of my dad's temper. Then my brother, probably hoping to calm the situation or at least gather information before it spread to the rest of the family. After that, the ones who only wanted to know the story so they could repeat it somewhere else later. I let the phone pulse and glow without touching it. By the time I reached my apartment building on the north side of Charlotte, the cold had settled deeper into the night. The parking lot was almost empty. A thin layer of frost had begun to spread across the cars that had been sitting still for hours. I parked in my usual spot near the front entrance and turned off the engine. The sudden silence inside the car felt thick, like the air shifted and settled around me. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. The image of my dad raising that champagne flute floated up again. The way the light from the chandelier hit the glass. For years, I thought that light meant something. Pride, approval, some kind of warmth. Tonight, it just looked harsh, empty, like every holiday toast we ever had was a performance he expected us to applaud. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling of the car. My heartbeat had steadied. My breathing was still calm. That calm scared me for a moment. I wondered if it meant something inside me had finally gone numb. Or maybe it meant the opposite. That after years of bending myself into someone I was not, the real version of me, finally had room to exhale. I grabbed my bag from the back seat and stepped into the cold. The wind stung my cheeks as I walked to the building entrance. Inside, the hallway was dim and quiet. A few Christmas wreaths hung on doors, the kind made of plastic berries and ribbon you can buy in bulk at any store. They looked cheerful in a way that felt disconnected from the night I had just lived. When I unlocked my apartment and pushed the door open, the darkness swallowed me. I did not turn on the lights. I dropped my keys on the small table by the entrance, took off my coat, and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. The silence felt different here. It had weight. It had shape. It spread through the room like a steady tide. I finally picked up the phone, not to call anyone back, but because the notifications kept flashing and I needed to silence them. The screen lit up in a flood of missed calls and messages. Mom's name repeated over and over. My brother's texts were short, urgent, incomplete. A few cousins had already sent question marks, as if I owed them an explanation. I turned the phone face down on the rug and let out a slow breath. I thought that would quiet things for a moment, but the phone vibrated again. Another message, another call. Their world was still spinning fast. Mine had slowed to a crawl. Eventually, curiosity tugged at me and I lifted the phone again. This time, it was not a call. It was a message from one of the younger cousins. A link. No words, just a link. My stomach tightened because I knew what it was before I even tapped it. The video, the moment, my dad speaking, my face, my voice saying, "So consider I am dead." Someone in that room had uploaded it to the family chat. And from there, it had already slipped into the hands of people who did not care about me at all. That was the danger of a family obsessed with appearances. Every private humiliation had the potential to become public evidence. I pressed play. Watching myself from the outside did something strange to me. The girl on the screen looked fragile but composed. The calmness in her voice was unsettling. I watched her take that sip of champagne and set the glass down so gently it almost looked rehearsed. I listened to the sentence fall from her lips. "So consider I am dead." I watched her stand and walk out of the frame while the room behind her fell into chaos. The sound of the room reacting was louder in the recording than it had been in person. A few gasps, a muffled laugh from someone who thought it was dramatic. A whispered comment and the scraping of chairs. It was messy and human in a way my family hated to be seen. And somehow that made me feel a quiet sense of release. I replayed the video once more, then a third time. But because watching it felt like watching the exact moment, a lifetime of pressure finally cracked open. Something inside me loosened with each viewing. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just a tired sort of relief. The truth had been spoken and there was no way to tuck it back in. I sat the phone down again, this time turning it off completely. The screen went black and stayed black. No more vibrations, no more buzzing. The silence that followed felt like someone had finally turned down the volume in a room where the noise had been screaming for years. I leaned my head back against the couch cushion and closed my eyes. The darkness of the apartment pressed around me, soft and familiar. I could still hear the faint echo of my dad's voice in my memory and the way the entire table had held its breath after he said the words. It felt distant now, like a scene from a movie I had seen too many times. I sat there for a long time without moving. I do not know how long exactly. Time felt stretched and slow. My thoughts drifted through old memories. Birthdays where my dad barely looked at me. Holidays where the rules mattered more than the people. Arguments where I was expected to apologize for hurting his feelings, even when he was the one who tore into mine. Years of trying to be enough for someone who had already decided I was less. At some point, I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights shimmered against the night sky. Snow was still falling, soft and steady. The world outside looked peaceful, untouched. It felt strange to know that somewhere out there, my family was probably scrambling to contain the narrative while I stood alone in my apartment. Feeling both hollow and strangely unbound. I told myself I would not go back. Not tonight, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. For the first time, that thought did not terrify me. It felt earned. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hand stayed steady. I took a sip and stared at the counter. The familiar shape of my life here. The life I had built, separate from the family name. A quiet life, but mine. No champagne flutes, no speeches, no cameras waiting to catch my reaction. When I returned to the living room, the darkness felt softer somehow, as if the room understood what had happened and was granting me a kind of fragile safety. I sat on the couch and pulled a blanket over my legs. The exhaustion finally hit me. The kind that does not come from crying or fighting, but from realizing how long you have been carrying something heavy. My phone remained off across the room. That alone felt powerful. A boundary drawn without apology. I knew the messages would keep coming. I knew Mom would try again. I knew my brother would reach out in a calmer tone. They would want explanations, reassurances, or at least some version of the story they could repeat while protecting the family image. But not tonight. Tonight, I let the silence do the talking. When the phone vibrated one last time before powering down, I glanced at the screen. A message had slipped through before the shutdown. Just a few words from Mom. "Please come home. We need to talk." I stared at the message, letting it hover in the dim light of the apartment. Then the screen went black. I did not answer. I was not ready to step back into their version of the world. Not yet. I leaned into the quiet and let the night settle around me, knowing this was only the beginning of what would come next. I sat in the quiet a little longer after the screen went black, letting the dim shape of the room settle around me. I thought exhaustion would pull me under, but my mind would not rest. It kept circling the message from Mom, the tone behind it, the fear woven into it. I was not ready to respond, not ready to re-enter that orbit again. So, I stayed still and breathed through the heaviness in my chest, waiting for the silence to soften. It did slowly enough that I finally pushed myself up from the couch and walked down the hall toward the bedroom. I had barely reached the doorway when I heard a soft knock. It was quiet, almost hesitant, the kind that did not belong in this building unless someone knew exactly which door they were coming to. I froze for a moment, wondering if it might be a neighbor or worse, someone sent by my family. I waited, listening for another knock. It came a few seconds later, a little firmer this time. I walked back through the living room and looked through the peephole. The hallway light flickered slightly, casting a warm circle around the person standing outside. It was Caleb. His shoulders were hunched against the cold, his hands in the pockets of his jacket. He looked like someone who had been sitting in his car for a while before gathering the nerve to come up. I unlocked the door and stepped aside to let him in. He walked past me slowly, his eyes moving over the darkness of the apartment as if trying to understand them. Kind of night I had just lived. He did not touch anything. He did not even take off his coat at first. He just stood there for a moment, then turned toward me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something heavy, something protective. I asked him how long he had been downstairs. He said only a few minutes. His voice was soft and steady, but I could hear a strain beneath it. He finally shrugged out of his coat and draped it over the chair. Then he looked at me again and I felt the shift in the air between us. That quiet pause people take when they are about to say something that will change the ground you are standing on. He told me that he had met with my dad earlier that day. He said it calmly, but the words still hit me hard enough that I gripped the back of the couch to steady myself. I asked him why. He said he had not planned it. Someone from my dad's business circle reached out and said my dad wanted a conversation. He thought it was something about me, something important, so he agreed. He moved closer to the window and looked out at the falling snow while he spoke. I think it was easier for him not to look directly at me while repeating what had been said. My dad began the conversation by mentioning the holiday, the family, the pressure of leadership, and the strain of carrying a legacy. It all sounded rehearsed. A warm introduction to clear the path for something colder. Then my dad shifted tone and asked Caleb about his work. Caleb told him the truth, that he was a freelance photographer with a decent reputation, that he had steady clients, and that he liked the independence of the career he had built. My dad looked unimpressed. According to Caleb, my dad said photography was not a real profession. He called it flimsy and temporary. The kind of artistic hobby people pursued when they did not have the discipline for something substantial. He asked Caleb how he planned to support a wife or children on such an unpredictable income. Caleb told him he had no intention of forcing me into anything and that we respected each other's careers. My dad did not accept that. He said that women my age often got confused by so-called passion-driven paths, but those phases faded eventually, and what mattered in the end was stability and reputation. Hearing those words come out of Caleb's mouth made my stomach twist. I knew my dad saw me that way, but to hear him say it out loud to someone I cared about felt like a new kind of violation. My dad continued, he told Caleb that he was not the right man for me, that he came from a different world, that he did not fit the expectations of our family. He said it so smoothly that anyone listening might have thought he was giving measured advice instead of delivering a quiet insult. But the worst part was when he said that if Caleb cared about me at all, he would step aside and let the family fix the confusion I was in. He even implied that there was someone more suitable waiting, someone already approved and aligned with the Mitchell reputation. Caleb finally turned from the window. There was something tight in his jaw, something wounded, but contained. He said he had tried to keep the conversation civil, but my dad pushed until it no longer felt like a discussion. It felt like an order. My dad told him that dating me was pulling me off track, that he was partially to blame for the distance I had been placing between myself and the family expectations. He said Caleb should let me go so I could come back home and marry the man they had chosen. Someone who would keep me safe, stable, and predictable. When Caleb repeated that last part, I felt the same coldness in my chest I had felt at the dinner table. But this time it was sharper, heavier, because it was no longer just about humiliation in front of relatives or being labeled an embarrassment. This was about control that stretched into my private life, into my relationships, into choices that should have belonged only to me. Caleb moved closer and sat on the edge of the coffee table facing me. He reached for my hand, but stopped just before touching it, as if giving me the space to choose whether I wanted comfort or clarity. I reached out slowly and let my fingers rest on his. He said he did not come here to pressure me. He did not come here to defend himself or ask anything of me. He just wanted me to know what happened because hiding it would only make the situation worse. He said my dad also mentioned the dinner and hinted that tonight would escalate if I did not come around soon. Caleb's voice cracked slightly when he said that, not because he was afraid for himself, but because he knew how it would hurt me. I pulled my hand back gently and stood up, walking across the room to where the shadows gathered near the bookshelf. I felt the air shift in my lungs, growing heavier with each breath. Not because I feared losing Caleb. I trusted him more than anyone else in my life. What scared me was realizing just how deep my dad's reach had burrowed into every part of me, even the corners I thought were safe. I told Caleb that I needed to step away from all of it, that I could not keep trying to explain myself or protect the parts of my life that should not need protection. I said I was done negotiating with people who never listened in the first place. If my dad could humiliate me at a family dinner and then turn around and demand obedience from the man I loved, then there was nothing left to salvage in the old version of us. Caleb nodded slowly. He did not argue. He did not try to talk me out of anything. He said he would support whatever decision I made, even if it meant he had to step aside for me to find clarity. But I told him that was not what I wanted. What I wanted was distance from the chaos, not distance from him. I wanted to rebuild my life without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing against my throat. He finally rose to his feet and stepped close enough for me to feel the warmth from his jacket still lingering on his skin. He told me that I was stronger than the story my dad kept writing about me. That I deserved a life shaped by my own hands, not one carved into place by pressure and legacy. His voice was soft when he said it, but there was conviction in it, too. The kind that anchored itself deep inside me. After he left, I stood near the door for a long moment, listening to the fading echo of his steps in the hallway. The apartment felt still again, but not empty. Something about his visit had grounded me, given me a kind of clarity that the silence alone had not. I walked back to the couch and sat down with my phone still powered off on the far end of the room. The quiet pulse of the house seemed to align with the steady beat in my chest. I opened my laptop and pulled up the calendar where family events and obligations were marked in neat little squares. Birthdays, charity dinners, annual board meetings disguised as holiday get-togethers, reminders of a life that had never belonged to me. I deleted each entry one by one. No hesitation, no explanation. When the last reminder disappeared from the screen, I closed the laptop and breathed out slowly. It felt like the first step across a threshold I had been afraid to approach for years. A point of no return, but in the best possible way, the kind that leads you toward a life you have not yet imagined. I walked to the bedroom and switched on the small lamp near the nightstand. The warm glow filled the room with a quiet sense of beginning. Not an ending, not a collapse, a beginning. I knew the fallout with my family was far from over. I knew they would not let me go easily. But standing there in that soft light, I felt a steadiness I had never known. It was the first moment I realized I was truly leaving the old world behind. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because breathing freely had finally become more important than being accepted. I knew I was crossing a threshold that night, stepping into a version of myself my family had spent years insisting did not exist. The quiet of my bedroom held steady around me as I breathed in the warm light from Mary, the small lamp on the nightstand. Something in me finally felt real, solid in a way it had never been inside my dad's house. I changed into an old sweatshirt and loose pants, pulled my hair back, and let my body sink into the familiar softness of my mattress. The exhaustion wrapped around me quickly. Not the chaotic kind that follows heartbreak, but the deep, steady kind that comes after choosing yourself for the first time in a long time. When I woke the next morning, the winter light leaking into the room looked pale and calm. For a moment, I stayed still, listening to the faint hum of the radiator and the quiet traffic on the street below. My life outside the Mitchell expectations always felt smaller, quieter, almost invisible. And yet lying there, I felt something like peace. Not dramatic or triumphant, just a steady thrum in my chest that reminded me this was my space, my world, my air. I made coffee and opened my laptop at the small table by the window. Most people never imagined a branding designer could build a stable life working independently. But for me, it had become the one place where no one dictated what I should do or who I should become. My clients were mostly small businesses around Charlotte, a bakery that wanted a more polished identity, a bookstore that needed signage for their new location, a nonprofit focused on literacy programs for inner-city schools. None of it was glamorous, but each project felt like a small act of creation. Something I could shape with my hands and imagination without someone breathing down my neck about legacy or reputation. As my coffee cooled beside me, I opened a project file for a boutique gym launching near the South End. They wanted a fresher palette and cleaner typography, something modern that still felt warm and local. While sketching concept thumbnails, my fingers moved with a familiar rhythm. Branding had become a way for me to stay grounded, to earn my keep without relying on the Mitchell name. It also helped me protect the other part of my life, the part no one in my family even knew existed. Painting has been with me since childhood. Not a pastime, not a distraction, a pulse. My earliest memories were full of colors and the smell of acrylic drying on cheap paper. But back then, the moment my dad saw me with a brush in my hand, he dismissed it with a single raised eyebrow. He said art was a dead end. He said creative careers were for people unwilling to commit to real work. He asked me why I wanted to spend hours painting when I could join committees, clubs, anything that would make me look well-rounded and presentable. Mom never disagreed, though sometimes she would smile softly when she passed my room, as if she could not decide whether to encourage me or to stay loyal to the expectations of the house. I kept painting anyway, quietly, secretly. In college, I would slip out late at night and use the small studio room at the far end of the arts building. After graduation, I found ways to squeeze painting between client work and sleep. And eventually, I created a but that would protect me from the weight of my own last name. I chose the moniker Li Yen, a small childhood nickname twisted into something unrecognizable to anyone who knew me. Growing up, I signed it on the corner of each piece, tucked it into digital files, and let it become a shield between my art and the scrutiny I had been trained to expect. I kept the two worlds separate. My branding clients knew me as a designer with a strong eye for color theory and storytelling. My collectors knew the anonymous painter who created quiet landscapes and portraits that carried a soft undertow of solitude. Only a few people knew the truth. Caleb, two close friends from college, and the gallery owner who agreed to represent me without ever revealing my identity to buyers. I told her that I did not want success tied to a family reputation I never believed in. She understood that more quickly than I expected. My thoughts drifted to the first email I received that said, "Sold." It had been a small 8 by 10 piece, a moody watercolor of a lake at dawn. I expected nothing from it. The gallery had been modest. The listing is simple. When the email came in, I stared at the word for several minutes before it clicked. Someone out there saw something in my work. Someone I had never met felt something when they looked at it. That realization felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and discovering wings. Did not know I had. Over the following years, the sales grew slowly. Not enough to get noticed by the big names, but enough to keep me painting without fear of ridicule. Then one afternoon, I received a message from the gallery saying a piece I submitted for an auction week had sold for nearly twice what they estimated. It was a landscape of blue ridge fog and soft layered blues. I remembered painting it after a long conversation with Caleb about wanting to disappear and still be seen. When that piece sold, I felt a quiet ripple of possibility inside my chest. But there was one painting I never let them sell. A large canvas titled Winter Orchard. A piece that came from a place so personal that parting with it felt impossible. It was the only work I asked the gallery to display but not list. The brush strokes were bold, layered with texture, and the palette was cooler, sharp than my usual tone. The gallery owner told me it drew a lot of attention from collectors. Some even asked privately if I would consider releasing it. I always said no. I had no idea then how much trouble that single decision would cause later. While I worked on the gym branding project, I heard the soft ping of a new email. I considered ignoring it until I saw the subject line. New inquiry for design services. The timing felt almost symbolic, as if the world outside my family drama was still opening quietly, steadily. The sender was a woman who ran a local candle business. She said she found my work through a referral and loved the way my designs told stories without unnecessary clutter. She wanted a full identity refresh for her online shop. I read the message twice, felt a small ache of gratitude in my chest, and wrote back agreeing to a consultation later in the week. My life was not glamorous, but it was mine. And every new project reminded me that independence was not only possible, it was sustainable. I stood and stretched, rolled my shoulders, and walked to the kitchen to refill my coffee. While the machine hummed, I glanced out the window at the snow softening over the parking lot. The world looked peaceful again. A fragile balance I knew would not last long, especially with the video from the dinner still spreading among relatives, but for the moment, that quiet was enough. When I returned to my table, a second email notification appeared. This time, the sender made my breath still for a moment. It was from the gallery. The subject line read, "Inquiry for Leanne." That usually meant a sale or a question about commissions, though I rarely took commissions because anonymity mattered more than extra income. I clicked the message open and scanned it slowly. The gallery owner wrote that a private collector from New York had visited the exhibition over the holiday and expressed strong interest in acquiring a piece from Leanne. Not just any piece. They specifically asked if the Winter Orchard painting was available for purchase. The gallery had followed my instructions and told them it was display only. The collector did not fight the answer, but they left their contact information and asked if I would reconsider for the right price. The message ended with the gallery owner saying she had never seen a collector so captivated by a piece and that she believed the offer could be substantial if I was open to a conversation. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the email. I felt the familiar tug of temptation, a quiet whisper of what it would mean to step into a larger spotlight. But the painting represented something too personal to let go. I painted it during a period when my relationship with my dad fractured in ways I could not yet articulate when I needed a place to put the grief and the anger and the loneliness. Setting it would feel like selling a wound that had not fully healed. But the gallery owner said the collector was influential in the art world, someone who could elevate my career without knowing my real identity, someone who could push Leanne into circles I had never imagined. The idea lingered in my mind. I closed the laptop and walked toward the window again. The winter light washed over the kitchen counter, making the apartment feel small and fragile, but full of possibility. My dad had never seen this part of me. He did not know about my clients. He did not know about the pieces I had sold or the collectors who admired my work. He did not know that I had built a world outside his reach, a world that grew one brushstroke at a time. And I realized he never truly cared to know. That truth settled into my bones as I watched the snow fall. I returned to the table, sat down, and clicked a reply. I typed a short message thanking the gallery for the update and asking for more details about the collector. I did not say yes. I did not say no. I simply opened the door a little wider. Then I closed my laptop again and let the silence stretch across the room. I had no idea that this small message from the gallery would become the fault line that disrupted everything my brother had been trying to hold together. I had no idea that this collector's interest would collide directly with the desperation brewing inside the Mitchell household. But in that moment, all I knew was that my life, the one my dad never believed in, was inching forward. And this time, I was not going to shrink to make space for anyone else. The quiet in my apartment held steady for the rest of the evening. But by the next morning, a thin uneasiness had settled beneath my ribs. I tried pushing forward with my work, sketching out new ideas for the candle business logo and reorganizing files for the gym project. But my focus kept drifting back to the gallery email. I wondered who the collector was, why Winter Orchard had struck them so deeply, and whether having someone want something that personal was supposed to feel flattering or intrusive. I tried to shake the thought off, but the feeling lingered. A small weight at the back of my mind. By early afternoon, the air had warmed slightly, melting part of the snow around the edges of the parking lot. I stepped outside to check the mail and breathe in something that felt less stale than my own apartment. My phone vibrated inside my jacket pocket. I let it ring once, then twice before finally pulling it out. I assumed it might be Caleb or maybe the gallery again. But when I saw who it was, my breath held in my throat. It was Mom. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Old instinct. Then something inside me shifted. The same small instinct that woke when the gallery mentioned a collector with serious influence. I answered the call, pressing the phone to my ear while my feet stayed planted on the icy walkway. Mom's voice came through thin and strained, not the soft, careful tone she used when trying to smooth things over between them. Rest of the family and me. It was sharper, urgent in a way that made my stomach tighten. She said she needed me to come home. Not later, not tomorrow, now. She repeated the word in a way that made it impossible to ignore. I asked her why and she hesitated long enough that I felt the panic rising on her end through the silence. She said it was complicated and that she would explain when I arrived before I could ask again. She said please and ended the call. I stood there a moment longer while the cold pricked at the back of my neck. I could have stayed away. It would have been easy to pretend I never picked up the phone, but something in her voice carried a weight I could not ignore. It was not guilt pulling at me, not fear of disappointing them again. It was simply time to face what was happening, even if the family did not care to see me as a full person. I needed to show myself I could stand in a room with them without shrinking. I walked back inside, grabbed my coat and keys, and headed to the car. The drive toward the Mitchell house took less than 20 minutes, but each mile felt heavier than the last. The large homes lining the street sparkled with expensive holiday decorations. Everything looked neat and contained, the way the family always wanted to appear. I pulled into the long driveway, noticing the line of cars that did not belong to relatives, my brother's SUV, the family attorney's dark sedan, a luxury town car I did not recognize. Something big was happening. And clearly it began long before Mom called. When I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not peaceful silence. Tight, brittle silence, the kind that gathers when people have been shouting and are trying to gather themselves again. Mom walked toward me quickly, relief washing over her face, even though her hands were trembling. She guided me toward the sitting room without giving me time to remove my coat. I could tell she had been crying. Her eyes were glassy and red around the edges. Inside the room, my brother Mason stood near the window with his hands clasped behind his back, pacing slightly. The family lawyer, Mr. Harris, sat stiffly on the couch, flipping through a stack of papers. My dad was in the far corner. His face was flushed with anger that had not fully cooled. And when he looked at me, the bitterness from the dinner had not faded. It had calcified, hardened. I stayed near the doorway until someone acknowledged me. Mason was the first. He gave me a quick nod, one that held more tension than welcome. He looked exhausted. The way people look when everything they have been building begins to slip through their fingers. I finally stepped farther inside. But the feeling of being out of place returned immediately. The familiar reminder that no matter how tall I stood, would always be seen as the misstep in their perfect formation. Mom led me to a chair. She said they needed to tell me something and that it was important I listened without interrupting. That alone told me this had nothing to do with the humiliation from Christmas dinner. This was about something else entirely. My dad began speaking with the stiff tone he used in boardrooms. He said there was a strategic partnership the company had been negotiating for months. A major expansion deal with a corporate client based in New York. Someone influential. Someone with the resources to keep the Mitchell business from sinking after a rough financial year. I watched his jaw clench when he said the words rough financial year, as if acknowledging the company was struggling tasted bitter in his mouth. He gestured sharply at Mason, who stepped forward and explained that part of the negotiations involved building a personal connection with a VIP client who appreciated the arts. The client mentioned having an interest in rare paintings, particularly from emerging artists. Mason said he wanted to impress them by gifting a piece from an artist whose work had recently gained traction. He tried contacting several galleries looking for something special. Then he found a piece that had been displayed during a seasonal exhibition, Winter Orchard. The moment he said the title, my stomach tightened. It felt as if the air thinned around me. I kept my face still, forcing myself to listen without reacting. Mason said the gallery refused to list the painting for sale, but the client had mentioned seeing it in person and admiring it. The problem was that the exhibition was ending in 2 days, and the gallery insisted the piece was not for purchase. Mason admitted he panicked. He needed to impress the client before the final negotiation meeting. He thought that gifting the painting would show respect, interest, sophistication, and that it would secure the deal. But since he could not get the real painting, he commissioned someone to recreate it. A forgery, a fake, he said it without flinching, but the shame in the room tightened around him. The family lawyer looked paler than before. My dad's fist clenched against the arm of the chair. The VIP client received the gift yesterday. They immediately recognized it as a forgery. They questioned the integrity of a company that would present counterfeit work as a gesture of good faith. They demanded a formal explanation and threatened to pull out of the deal entirely. Mason said they had tried contacting the gallery again for information about the real artist. They asked about availability, about commission, about any chance of obtaining authentic work to make things right. But the gallery repeated that the artist remained anonymous and selective. Mom swallowed hard and finally said the name of the collector. I felt my heartbeat stall when I heard it. It was the same name mentioned in the email from the gallery. The same person who wanted Winter Orchard. The same person whose interest I had not yet responded to. I sat perfectly still, letting the realization settle and layer. My brother had embarrassed a client influential enough to impact the company's future. And that client was the same person who had just reached out to buy my painting. My painting that the family did not even know belonged to me. For a moment, I did not know whether to feel fear for how tangled this was becoming or relief that the truth in some form was finally emerging from the shadows. Mom looked at me as if waiting for something in my expression to explain whether hope still existed. Dad leaned forward, his face tight. He said the client was furious and that the company was only days away from losing the contract entirely. He implied that everything could be fixed if they could find a way to reach the artist of Winter Orchard. He looked at me again, but not with an apology, with expectation, as if I owed them a solution simply because I shared their last name. I took a slow breath, letting the pieces of the situation arrange themselves in my mind. My family had spent years telling me art was meaningless. They had dismissed it, belittled it, treated it like a childish distraction. But now they were burning in the fire created by their own arrogance. And the only water that could put it out was the very thing they had taken from me. For a moment I said nothing. The room held its breath. Then I exhaled and studied myself, realizing that everything was about to shift. Not because I wanted revenge, but because this crisis had finally revealed the truth behind all their expectations and insults. They needed something they never valued, something they refused to take seriously, something that came from me. I let the silence stretch a little longer until I felt the weight of their anticipation press against my skin. Then I leaned back in the chair and let the room settle around me. The tension in that house felt almost physical, like the walls were straining to hold in everything that had happened. My brother stood stiffly near the window and Dad stared at the floor as if refusing to meet his own reflection in any form. For a moment, I stayed quiet, waiting. I needed them to continue to reveal the rest of the mess they had created. I knew there had to be more. My family never reached panic mode over something minor. Mason hesitated, then rubbed the back of his neck. He looked older in that moment, not because of age, but because shame had weight and it had settled across his shoulders. He said there was something I did not know, something that happened days before the gift was given. He said it began at the exhibition itself. He explained that during the holiday event, the VIP client had attended the opening night of the winter showcase. The gallery was smaller, intimate, filled with warm lights and soft murmurs from collectors and art critics. Mason had gone along because he wanted to understand the client more personally. He wanted to learn what impressed them, what moved them. That was how he positioned himself anyway. But deep down, I knew he must have sensed pressure already. Dad had been pushing him relentlessly for results, calling him the future of the company, a future that kept slipping further away every year. At the exhibit, Mason said he followed the VIP client quietly as they drifted from one canvas to then the next. Then the client stopped right in front of Winter Orchard. Mason said the client spent a long time staring at it, hands behind their back, the kind of posture people take when something reaches them on a level they cannot immediately name. The client apparently told someone near them that the painting felt honest, that it carried winter sadness, but also a quiet kind of resilience. Mason had caught enough of the conversation to know they were deeply affected by it. He paused then and looked at me. I kept my expression still, though inside something stirred, a mixture of pride and dread. Pride because something I had created touched someone with sincerity. Dread because this was exactly the moment when my world and the family business collided in ways I never intended. Mason continued after the exhibition. He checked the gallery website to find the painting. He said he searched under every category, every collection, but he could not find it listed for sale. He said he thought maybe it had been purchased earlier or moved into a private collection. He called the gallery, but they told him the painting was exhibition only and not for sale. They did not elaborate, only repeated that it belonged to the artist and would not be available when the showcase ended. The timeline was shrinking. Mason kept emphasizing that the final negotiation meeting with the client was scheduled for 2 days after the exhibition closed. He said he kept thinking that if the client admired the painting that much, gifting it would secure the deal. He said he tried calling the gallery again, trying to persuade them to at least pass along a message to the artist. The gallery refused. They said the artist did not take direct commissions and maintained selective contact even with them. Mason's voice cracked slightly when he said he felt cornered. Dad's expectations were suffocating him. The client's admiration for the painting felt like the only opening he had left. The exhibition was ending in 2 days, and Mason thought that once the display was taken down, no one would question where the painting went or whether it was meant to be sold. He thought he could somehow intercept it. He said he even tried asking a gallery assistant about the process. They told him again that the piece was the property of the artist and would be stored after closing night. Mason said he left the gallery feeling desperate. That was when he made the worst decision of his career. He hired someone to recreate the painting. He found an art student through a contact who claimed they could do a credible replication quickly. He showed them photos he had taken of the piece at the exhibit. He said he knew it would not be perfect, but believed the client would appreciate the gesture more than the details. He said he believed the emotional impact mattered more than authenticity. The words hung in the air like smoke. I watched him swallow hard. He said when the gift was delivered, he expected gratitude. Instead, the client immediately recognized it as a forgery. They called the company and said they were insulted. They accused the family of using cheap tactics and questioned whether the Mitch name represented dishonesty everywhere, not just in art. They demanded an explanation and threatened to cancel the entire partnership. Dad had exploded hours earlier before I arrived. That explained the red in his face and the silent rage simmering across the room. I leaned back slowly, letting the truth wash through me. Then Mom lifted a folder from the coffee table and placed it on my lap. She said they needed me to see something. I opened the folder. Inside there were printed photographs of the forged painting, cell phone pictures taken under harsh lighting, but the moment my eyes landed on them, the breath left my lungs. It was unmistakable. Winter orchard. My winter orchard, except wrong. Everything was almost right, but slightly off. The brush strokes looked tense, imitated instead of born. The colors were close, but lacked the layered texture that lived between my strokes. The composition was copied, but the soul was missing entirely. Seeing it like that felt like an intrusion, as if someone had reached into the most private corner of my body and traced something intimate without permission. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I stared at the photographs for a long moment while Mom watched me anxiously, waiting for some kind of reaction. Dad sat forward as if he expected me to offer a solution. Mason looked both ashamed and hopeful, the way a drowning man might look at someone on the shore. What none of them knew was that this painting, the one in the photos and the real one still hanging at the gallery, belonged to a version of me they had spent years crushing. A version of me they insisted did not matter. Now suddenly it mattered more than anything. I asked them how quickly the client discovered it was fake. Mason said almost instantly. He said the client told the assistant delivering the gift that the brushwork was inconsistent with the piece they had studied closely at the exhibition. They knew enough about art to recognize tension where fluidity should be. They placed the painting aside and refused the gesture. They called Mason directly and demanded to know why he tried to deceive them. I closed the folder gently. My fingers felt cold, not from the room, but from the realization of how far this had escalated. I asked why they were telling me all of this. Dad finally spoke. Then his voice was low and strained. He said they needed to contact the artist. Not a general inquiry, not a polite request. They needed a direct conversation. They needed access. They needed someone who could salvage the situation before the deal collapsed entirely. They wanted me to help them reach lean. The irony of it pulled at me sharply. I sat there looking at their faces, each filled with a different shade of desperation. They wanted something from an artist they had never respected, a world they dismissed, a life they never even saw, and they had no idea the solution they were begging for was sitting in front of them. The realization made everything inside me feel heavier and clearer at the same time. I did not speak, not yet. The rush of thoughts needed a moment to settle. I stood slowly, walked toward the fireplace, and stared at the framed photographs on the mantel. The family vacation pictures, the holiday portraits, the staged moments that portrayed a unity we never had. I studied them quietly before turning back to the three people waiting for me. Mom looked hopeful. Mason looked terrified. Dad looked like he was preparing to demand obedience again. But something was different now. I could feel it in the air, in the way my shoulders squared naturally instead of collapsing inward, in the calm that washed through me, replacing fear with clarity. Winter Orchard was never for sale, not for money, not for prestige, and absolutely not to save the reputation of the people who called my choices embarrassing. I returned to the chair and sat down, folding my hands in my lap. I told them I needed more information before I made any decision. My voice came out steady, not loud, not shaky. Just steady. They nodded, relieved to hear anything that sounded like cooperation. Inside, though, something else was forming, a line drawing itself with sharp precision. A boundary I had never enforced before. They had crossed into my world without permission. They had taken something from me they did not even know belonged to me. And now they wanted me to help them undo the consequences of their own arrogance. The moment I saw the forged painting, something in me shifted permanently now that the truth sat in front of me, thin as paper and heavy as stone. I also knew it would be the first move in a story none of them expected. I looked at the folder one more time, then closed it completely and placed my hand on top of it. That was where I left my words for now. Quiet, controlled, letting the in. I realized in that stillness that everything was finally beginning to turn. I kept my hand on the closed folder for a long moment, letting the weight of everything inside it press against my palm. The photos of the forged painting felt heavier than any accusation or insult my family had thrown at me. They had taken something I created from a private place and twisted it through desperation and arrogance. And as I looked up at the three of them, I realized none of them yet understood the full extent of what they had done. Mom broke the silence first. Her voice was unsteady, but she tried to steady it with a breath. She said they needed to reach the artist. She said this situation was spiraling out of control. She said Mason had made a terrible mistake, but the company could still be saved if the true artist of Winter Orchard stepped in. She added that if they lost this partnership, the consequences for the family business would be devastating. He did not tell her to stop speaking. He did not assert control the way he usually did. That alone told me how dire things were. He had lost more ground than I had ever seen. Mason stood near the window with his arms folded across his chest. He looked worn down, almost hollow, the way someone looks when they've been awake for too long under too much pressure. He said the client was still furious and would only reconsider if the artist could speak to them directly. He added that the client's assistant had been calling since early morning and that Dad had refused to pick up the phone until they had a plan. They were waiting for the unknown artist to rescue them, the very artist they had unknowingly tried to copy. I took a deep breath and sat back, letting my gaze settle on the edge of the folder. Then I stood. I told them I needed a minute outside. Mom nodded quickly, almost too eagerly, as if relieved that I was not walking out of the house again. I stepped through the hallway and into the backyard. The winter air was sharp against my face. The lawn looked frozen in place, the grass stiff under the thin sheet of snow. I walked to the edge of the patio and let the cold sink into me. Standing there, I thought about the early morning I painted Winter Orchard. It had been right after another fight with Dad. He said my choices were embarrassing. He said my artistic pursuits were childish. He said I was wasting potential. Those words had sliced deeper than he realized. And I poured every piece of that wound into the canvas. I had kept the painting because it was not just a landscape. It was a map of everything I was trying to heal. And now it had become the center of a crisis my family had created through choices. I warned them against my entire life. I walked back inside. When I returned to the sitting room, the three of them looked at me as if they were waiting for a verdict. Mom opened her mouth but closed it again. She looked afraid of saying the wrong thing. I sat down slowly. My voice felt calm, almost too calm. When I said I needed to confirm something directly with the gallery before any other conversation could continue. Dad stiffened. He asked why. I ignored the question and pulled my phone from my coat pocket. I stepped into the hallway again and dialed the gallery owner. She answered with her usual warm tone, asking how I was and whether I had had time to consider the inquiry about Winter Orchard. I told her I was calling because something urgent had come up. I asked if she could confirm once more that the VIP collector from New York was the same client who had admired the painting at the exhibition. She confirmed it immediately. She said the client had been deeply moved by the piece and had asked if it might become available in the future. She said she had never seen them linger over an artwork the way they lingered over mine. I closed my eyes for a second and let her words settle. Then I told her I appreciated the information and would call again soon. When I returned to the sitting room, Mom was wringing her hands together. She looked up at me with a mixture of hope and fear. She asked if the gallery told me anything helpful. I said yes. I said I now had clarity about the situation. Dad finally spoke. He said they needed the artist contacted immediately. He said they needed the artist to explain to the client that the forgery was a mistake and that the family meant no disrespect. He said an apology from the artist might calm the situation enough to reopen negotiations. I could not help the small breath of disbelief that escaped my chest. They wanted the artist to take responsibility for a forgery they created. They wanted the artist to smooth over the consequences of their own desperation. I looked at each of them slowly. I let the silence stretch long enough for the weight of the moment to build. Then I sat down again and folded my hands in my lap. I said I could talk to the artist. Mom gasped softly, almost a sound of relief. She stepped forward as if instinctively drawn to hope. She asked how. She asked whether I knew them. She asked if there was a way to reach them quickly. Dad did not speak. He watched me with narrowed eyes, suspicion flickering behind them. He did not like not knowing something. He did not like not being in control of the information. For the first time in my life, I held something he did not. I said I had a connection to the artist. I said the artist trusted me. I said that if there was a conversation to be had, I was the one who could initiate it. Mom let out a breath she had been holding. She stepped closer to me, her voice trembling as she said she was grateful and that she knew I did not owe them anything. She said she was sorry things had gotten so bad. She said Mason had been under pressure. She said Dad had been too harsh. She said she hoped I could find it in myself to help them fix this before everything fell apart. Dad remained still. His silence was louder than the words coming from the others. His pride was swallowing him whole. And for once, he could not command the situation. He could not intimidate me. He needed me and we both knew it. I let the quiet settle again. Then I looked directly at him. He held my gaze, but I could see the tension in the slight twitch of his jaw. He did not want to give me an inch. He did not want to acknowledge any wrongdoing, but the situation demanded more than his pride could offer. I told them I would consider reaching out to the artist. Mom's shoulders dropped with relief. Mason exhaled shakily. Dad did not react, but his eyes darkened in a way that told me he knew there was a shift happening, a shift he could not reverse. Then I said something that drew the room still again. I said that before any contact could happen, there needed to be certain assurances. I said the artist would not work with people who disrespected their craft. I said the artist would not help without understanding the full context of what happened and why. Mom nodded eagerly, saying she understood. Mason said he would answer any questions. Dad stayed silent, but his glare sharpened. I looked back at them, feeling a steadiness I had never felt before in this house. They were no longer towering figures above me. For the first time, they were people who had crossed a line and needed someone they had underestimated. I said I would speak to the artist privately. I said I would relay the situation to them. I said I would decide what happened next based on that conversation. Mom thanked me again, her voice thick with emotion. Mason looked like someone had given him a second chance at breathing. Dad kept his arms crossed, but his silence was no longer a wall of dominance. It was the silence of someone who had finally been forced to face his own mistakes. As I stood to leave the room, I felt the power shift land fully inside me. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady and irreversible. They thought the artist was a stranger, someone distant, someone they could appeal to, someone who might save them. They had no idea the artist they needed was the very daughter they erased. Dismissed, belittled, and humiliated. And I was finally ready to decide what that was worth. I turned toward the doorway. Mom called after me, asking gently if I would keep them updated. I said I would speak to the artist soon. I walked down the hallway, letting the quiet follow me like a shadow. And for the first time in years, I felt the balance inside that house tip in my direction. I did not rush. I let each step ground me. When I returned to the sitting room, they were all still there, frozen in the same positions, as if the air itself held them in place. Mom looked hopeful in a way that broke something old and tired inside me. Mason looked trapped between guilt and relief. Dad looked like a man standing on the last edge of his pride. I sat back down slowly, letting the chair steady my posture. None of them spoke at first. I took that silence and shaped it into the beginning of something I never thought I would say in that house. I said I had thought about their request. I said that yes, I could reach the artist. I said I was willing to move forward with that connection, but not without terms, clear terms, terms that would stand in the open and could not be bent later. My voice stayed level, almost calm, but there was steel underneath it. Mom blinked at me as if trying to understand where this firmness came from. Dad narrowed his eyes, and only then did I see the small flash of panic behind his expression. He knew what it meant for me to speak this way. He knew it meant he had lost control. I kept going before anyone could interrupt. I said there would be 4 conditions, and every one of them had to be accepted before anything moved forward. The first condition, a public apology, not whispered in private, not dropped as a half-hearted comment, a real apology in front of the entire family, in front of the same people who watched him humiliate me at the Christmas dinner table. I said he needed to acknowledge what he said and the harm it caused. I said the humiliation he threw at me needed to be undone with equal visibility. Mom inhaled sharply. Mason shifted, but neither spoke. Dad stayed rigid, but I could see the tension in his jaw working back and forth. The second condition, the family would no longer interfere in my personal life, not my relationships, not my future, not my home, not my choices. I said there would be no more arranged introductions, no more secret meetings with people I dated, no more judgments dressed as concern. I said my life had been shaped too long by expectations that never belonged to me. And that chapter was ending. Mason exhaled quietly, almost like a protest he did not have the strength to voice. The third condition, I said I would continue my artistic and professional path independently. No questions, no pressure, no commentary. I said they would not use my art as a tool for the company or for reputation. They would not lay claim to anything I created, and they would not use my work to elevate themselves. My work belonged to me. That boundary would not bend. The fourth condition, I would take no money from the family. Not now, not later. No inheritance, no trust, no shares of the company, no financial tie that could be used as leverage. If I helped them salvage the contract through the artist, it would not be because I owed them or because I expected something in return. It would be an act of integrity, not dependency. When I finished listing the conditions, the silence in the room deepened. It pressed into the corners of the house, brushing against the photographs on the wall and the polished wood floors. The way cold water fills the lowest parts of a valley. Mom whispered something under her breath, barely audible. Then she lifted a hand to her face. Her eyes filled quickly, almost like grief. But there was something else in it, too. Recognition. She was seeing a version of me she should have known long ago. Mason stepped forward slightly. His voice sounded thin when he said that maybe the terms were too extreme. He said the company was already struggling and the pressure Dad was under had been enormous. He said we needed unity, not division. He said maybe I should reconsider parts of what I asked. I lifted my eyes to him and said no. Not loudly, not aggressively, just firmly enough that it stopped him mid-sentence. For years, I had accommodated their expectations and carried the consequences. Unity had always meant silence on my end and control on theirs. That kind of unity had fractured me more than any crisis could. I was not returning to that role again. Mom tried to speak then, her voice trembling as she said she understood why I needed boundaries. She said she understood I had been hurt, that I had been ignored, that she wished things had been different. Her tears slipped down her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. She said she wanted to make things right, even if she did not know how. David still said nothing. I turned my attention to him. He sat in the corner like a monument cracked down the middle. His silence had always been a weapon, but now it felt like a barrier he could not move through. For years, he had controlled every room he stepped into. For years, he had shaped the family with a rigid hand. For years, he had believed his authority was unquestioned. Now, he was facing someone he had dismissed, someone he had belittled, someone he had erased, and that someone held the one lifeline the company needed. I told him I needed his answer. Not later, not after another meeting, not after he cooled off. Now, for the first time since I arrived, he seemed unsure of what to do. His pride clung to him like armor that had started to rust. He opened his mouth, closed it again, swallowed, then finally looked away from me. That was the moment I felt something shift. Not triumph, not victory, just truth settling into its rightful place. He asked me to repeat the first condition. I said he needed to apologize publicly. He frowned and I could see the fight rise in him, then falter. He asked if it had to be in front of everyone. I said yes. I said it had to match the harm. He stared at the floor again. Mom placed a gentle hand on his arm and whispered something about the company, something about the future, something about how this was the only way. Mason watched him, waiting with attention that looked almost painful. David finally looked at me again. His voice, when it came, sounded scraped raw. He asked what the second condition was. I repeated it. He did not argue that time. His jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. He asked about the third condition. I said it calmly again. No interference in my career. Independence, respect, distance. He nodded once stiffly, almost like his body did it before his mind could object. Then he asked about the fourth, the one that severed financial ties completely. He looked confused by it. He said he did not understand why I would reject money that was technically mine. I told him I did not want anything that could ever be turned into a leash. I said freedom meant nothing if someone else held the key. His expression shifted. Then something broke at the edges of his posture. Maybe pride, maybe fear, maybe the first flicker of understanding that he had lost the ability to shape me. Mom whispered that they needed to agree, that it was time to listen, that losing everything was not worth holding on to an old version of the family that had already fallen apart. Dad kept his eyes on me. The second stretched long and sharp between us. I refused to look away. After a moment that felt like it lasted several years, he nodded. Not quickly, not gracefully. But he nodded. He said he agreed to the terms. His voice was thin, almost unfamiliar to my ears. It did not sound like surrender. It sounded like a man who finally realized his power had limits. Mom let out a breath that turned into a sob. She covered her mouth and wiped quickly at her cheeks. Mason exhaled in relief, though his shoulders still sagged under the shame of everything that led to this moment. I stayed seated. I stayed steady. Dad said he would do what was required. He said the company needed saving. And then in a softer, grudging tone, he said the family needed saving, too. I did not react. I let his words drift across the room, touching nothing. Words were easy. Change was not. I stood slowly. They followed my movements with careful eyes, like people watching someone dismantle the last pieces of a life they assumed would never change. I told them I would contact the artist. I said I would give them an update soon. I did not promise anything else. Then I walked toward the doorway again, letting the shift in the air settle behind me. For the first time in my life, I had spoken terms that were mine, and the family that once tried to contain me had finally been forced to hear them. I walked away from the sitting room and let the sound of their quiet desperation fade behind me. For the first time, I was not carrying their emotions like a weight on my ribs. I felt the shift inside me settle into something steady, something final. My terms had been spoken and accepted. The balance in the house had changed. They could no longer shape me into the outline they wanted. Now they were waiting on me. The next morning, Mom texted me asking if I could return to the house by the afternoon. She said the family meeting had been arranged. She said Dad was preparing. She said they would all be there. Her messages came in short bursts full of anxious hope. I read them while sitting in my apartment with a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. And for a long moment, I did not move. I was not nervous. I was not angry. I felt something closer to clarity. The kind that comes when a wound stops hurting the way it used to. I arrived at the house just after the winter light began settling behind the neighborhood roofs. Cars filled the driveway. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had been at the Christmas dinner and watched my humiliation without stepping in. People who had whispered behind their napkins and avoided eye contact when Dad called me an embarrassment. Now they were back waiting for a performance in the opposite direction. Mom met me at the front door. She held my arm with a trembling kind of relief as she led me inside. The house was warmer than usual, full of murmurs and shifting footsteps. I could feel the tension pulsing through the halls like a low current. In the sitting room, chairs had been arranged into a loose semicircle. Dad stood near the mantel, rigid and formal, his expression carved from something brittle. Mason sat at the edge of a chair, fingers interlaced tightly between his knees. I walked in and stood at the center of the room. Conversations quieted. Eyes followed me. Some are curious. Some are uncomfortable. Some were guilty. Though many of them had always avoided guilt by pretending they never saw anything. Mom stepped beside Dad and whispered something to him. He did not respond. He kept his arms folded across his chest, then slowly lowered them as if his body reminded him of the commitment he had made. He cleared his throat. The room settled. He began by saying he had something to address. His voice sounded tight and unfamiliar. I had heard him speak at fundraisers and corporate meetings with a confident, steady tone that drew people in. This was nothing like that. This was stripped down, forced through pride, shaped by necessity rather than choice. He said he had spoken words at Christmas dinner that he never should have spoken. He said his behavior was inappropriate. He said he had caused harm. He said he had humiliated someone who did not deserve it. The room shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else looked at the floor, but I felt no movement inside, no satisfaction, no surge of victory. His apology was not meant to heal me. It was meant to meet the requirements, and that was fine. I did not need anything more from him, Dad continued, stumbling once over his phrasing. He said he had allowed pressure and stress to cloud his judgment, but the responsibility was still his. He said he owed me an apology. Then he paused and looked directly at me. His face was pulled tight around his eyes, but there was no aggression, no challenge, just a man swallowing his own ego because he had no other choice. He said he was sorry. The room fell completely silent. Even the heating vents seemed to hush. I nodded once, a small motion, a quiet acknowledgement. I did not thank him. I did not comfort him. I did not attempt to soften the moment for anyone in the room. The apology was his, not mine to carry or ease. Mom exhaled shakily and reached for his arm, but he stepped away in a subtle, tense motion, as if the physical contact might break the last of the control he was holding on to. There was nothing else to say. The apology was done. The terms were met. I could feel the shift ripple through the room like a cold wind. Everyone saw it. For years, they watched him treat me like the least valuable part of the family. Now, they were watching him stand at the front of the room and acknowledge his own wrongdoing. It changed the shape of every relationship in that house. Quietly, permanently, I let the silence linger for a moment longer. Then, I said I would reach out to the gallery. Mom nodded quickly, wiping her eyes. Mason straightened his posture with a visible sense of hope. Adam lowered himself slowly into a chair. Exhaustion etched across the lines of his face. I stepped away from the center of the room and walked toward the hallway, pulled my phone from my coat pocket. There were several missed calls from the gallery owner already. I dialed her number and stepped outside onto the porch where the cold air cleared my lungs. She answered immediately. Her voice was warm, but I could hear urgency beneath it. She said the VIP client had followed up again and that they were still willing to reopen the conversation if the artist contacted them with clarity about the situation. She asked if I had decided how to proceed. I told her yes. I told her I was ready to move forward. I told her the artist would speak to the client. She did not know she was speaking to the artist. That was part of the protection I had built. But hearing her relief softened something inside me. She said she would arrange a call with the client and their assistant and that she would relay the details to me within the hour. When I stepped back into the house, the family had dispersed into small pockets of conversation. Some avoided my gaze. Some tried to approach with awkward sympathy. I walked past them without stopping. Mom joined me in the hallway. She asked if things were moving forward. I told her yes. She pressed a hand over her chest and whispered that she was grateful. I nodded but felt no reason to say more. Later that evening, I received the details of the scheduled call. I spoke with the gallery owner again and she relayed the client's concerns. They did not want the forgery to reflect poorly on the artist. They did not want their admiration for the work associated with dishonesty. They wanted assurance that the artist had not been involved in the counterfeit gesture. The anger had shifted from insult to disappointment, which was easier to work with. I told the gallery owner I would draft a statement for her to present. I spent the next hour crafting a message that explained the artist had no knowledge of the forgery and did not authorize any replication. I wrote that the artist valued authenticity and integrity above all else. I wrote that the artist was willing to reopen communication so long as respect was mutual. The words flowed easily because they were mine. Every part of that statement came from my own experience of being dismissed and invalidated by people who believed they owned me. The gallery owner sent it to the client that same night. The next morning, she forwarded their response. They accepted the explanation. They said they appreciated the transparency. They said they were willing to continue negotiations with the Mitchell Company under the condition that future interactions would be handled with direct honesty. By the afternoon, the partnership had been salvaged. I drove to the house again, not because I wanted to celebrate with them, but because I wanted to close the loop. Mason met me at the door this time. His relief was visible in the looseness of his shoulder. He said they had heard from the client. He said the contract was still alive. He said they owed everything to the artist. He had no idea he was talking to the person who had quietly saved him from the fallout of his own desperation. Dad appeared behind him. His expression was stiff, contained, but there was no anger there anymore, just fatigue and something that looked faintly like acknowledgement. He nodded at me without speaking. I nodded back. Mom hurried into the room, tears in her eyes again. She said the company could breathe for the first time in weeks. She said she did not know how to thank the artist. She said she was grateful that I was the bridge between them. I let her speak. Her gratitude did not need to reach the truth of who the artist was. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I said only that the artist cared about integrity and respected the client. I said the situation had been resolved and that was enough. For a moment, the house fell into an uneasy quiet. Not tense this time, just uncertain, like everyone was waiting to see what shape the family would take now that the old foundations had cracked. Then something happened that none of them could hide. A subtle change. A shift behind their eyes. The realization that the daughter they had dismissed, ignored and diminished was the same person who had pulled them back from the edge. They understood something deeper than gratitude. They understood that they had been wrong about me. Not just in the last week, but for years. And for the first time in my life, I watched my family bow. Not with words, not with gestures, but in the silent recognition that the balance had changed forever. I let the moment rest between us. I gathered my coat from the back of a chair and stepped toward the doorway. I told them I would be in touch. Then I stepped out into the cold evening air. The snow had begun to fall again in slow drifting flakes. The quiet felt cleaner this time, softer. The weight on my chest had lifted. The wind brushed my hair as I walked to my car. And for the first time in a long while, I felt entirely outside their shadow. I unlocked the door and sat behind the wheel, letting the silence wash through me. The family had changed. The contract was saved. The apology had been spoken. But none of those things were the true turning point. The turning point was simple. They finally saw me. And I no longer needed them to. That thought settled so quietly in my chest that for a moment I did not even realize how much space it created. I drove away from the house feeling like someone had opened a window inside me. After years of stale air, the cold winter light followed me down the long road toward my apartment, soft and pale against the windshield, and for the first time in a long while, I did not feel the weight of our family name pressing on the back of my neck. The weeks that followed drifted by in a strange mix of calm and adjustment. Life did not fall perfectly into place, but it no longer felt like something I had to fight through every morning. I returned to my work, easing into projects that had been waiting for me before everything with Dad and Mason exploded. Clients called, meetings were scheduled, and the comfort of a routine helped me find my footing again. The familiarity of design work, the long hours refining colors and fonts and small details had always been a quiet refuge for me. It still was. In the afternoons, when the light slanted through the windows just right, I found myself painting again. My canvas stood in the same corner of my apartment where it had always been. But it felt different now. Maybe because I finally felt different when I picked up the brush. There was no longer a voice in the back of my mind whispering that it was a waste of time or that real work belonged inside a boardroom, not a studio. The silence inside me had changed shape. It had room for me now. My relationship with Daniel slipped back into place easily, like a door that had been waiting to be opened again. He never pressured me about the family situation. He never asked for updates or solutions or forgiveness. I was not ready to give. He simply showed up when I needed him, dropped groceries outside my door when I was too tired to think, and sat beside me on nights when I wanted company without conversation. Sometimes we talked about the future as if it were something soft and possible. Sometimes we talked about nothing at all. Both felt like healing. My family kept their distance, not out of resentment, but something more uncertain. A careful, cautious distance, as if they were trying to learn new steps in a dance they had ruined for too many years. Mom sent a few messages. They were brief, gentle, never asking for more than I could give. I responded sometimes, sometimes not. She seemed to understand that this new shape between us needed space. She no longer begged me to return to the house or to pretend the old way of living still worked. She simply asked if I was warm, if I was eating, if work was going well. Small things, easy things, things a mother might ask without demanding anything in return. Dad did not reach out. He stayed silent in the same way the earth stays still after a storm. I did not expect anything else. I had not asked for transformation, only accountability. And he had given the smallest version of it he could manage. That apology had been a door closing, not opening. I did not need him to grow into a better man for me. I only needed him to stop shrinking me. Mason sent a single message about 2 weeks after the contract with the client was finalized. He said the company was stabilizing again. He said the meeting with the client had gone better than expected. He thanked me for what I had done, though the thank you was awkward and stiff, like he was still unsure if he had the right to say it. I appreciated the attempt, even if it did not bridge the gap between us. Some distances were meant to be respected, not repaired. The gallery kept me updated about the client. They were still interested in acquiring one of my pieces, though not the one displayed at the exhibition. They understood now that the work had meaning to me and declined to pursue it further. Instead, they requested a private viewing sometime in the spring. I agreed. Not for the prestige or the opportunities it might bring, but because it felt like another step toward a life I had chosen. Not one chosen for me. On quiet mornings, I would think about the night at Christmas dinner and the moment. My dad looked at me in front of everyone and called me the biggest embarrassment to our family. The memory no longer stung the way it once had. It felt distant, like something that had happened to someone else. And yet, it also felt like the moment that had split my life open. I could trace everything that happened afterward back to that single sentence. Back to the instant when I took a sip of champagne and said he could consider me dead. I had not said it to wound him, though it certainly shocked him. I had not said it to punish the family or make a dramatic exit. I said it because it was the only way I knew to save the part of myself that was disappearing under his expectations. I said it because if I did not draw a line that night, I knew I would keep carrying the weight of his disappointment until it crushed whatever pieces of myself I had been trying to protect. In the weeks that followed, I realized something important. Losing the version of my family I had once wanted was painful. But losing myself would have been devastating. Sometimes choosing to walk away is not abandonment. It is survival. It is a beginning disguised as an ending. One afternoon near the end of January, I stood by the window in my apartment, watching the light move across the floor. Outside, the trees were bare and the air had a sharpness that made the whole world feel quieter. I was mixing paint for a new canvas, one that had been forming slowly in my mind since the night everything changed. There was no sense of urgency, no pressure to prove anything, only a calm, steady pull toward creation. I thought about how different my life felt now that I could breathe without looking over my shoulder for someone else's expectations. I thought about the woman I had been a month before. Sitting at that dinner table, waiting for approval from someone who had never learned how to give it. I thought about the woman I was becoming. One decision at a time, I dipped my brush into the paint and pressed the first stroke onto the canvas. The color spreads easily, rich and warm. It felt like reclaiming something, like returning to myself after a long absence. As the painting began to take shape, I realized I did not regret the words I had spoken at Christmas. They were harsh, yes, but they were my truth. And sometimes the truth has to be sharp to cut through the noise. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power and truth can be the loudest revenge.